Hi everyone, and welcome to Major Migrations Made Easy. My name is Tim de Beek, and I'm a staff software engineer at Modern, where I work on OpenRewrite. I appreciate you all for coming, especially as this is the third day of the conference, and we're getting close to lunch. To show my appreciation for all of you showing up, I want to break away from some of the cliches that you've probably seen a couple times by now over the last couple of days. So even though this is a talk on migrations, I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand if you're using Java 8 or 11 or anything like that. Instead, just because you're here, we're just going to assume that you're probably working with something that you want to get rid of. But don't think of this as me thinking poorly of you. Instead, I invite you all to think poorly of the person on your left or on your right. Because think to yourself, as you look to the person on your left, that this person is probably still not using Spring Boot 3, which came out half a year ago. And we're seeing that not a lot of people have made the change yet. And that's because to adopt Spring Boot 3, you have to first migrate to Java 17. And of course, the person hasn't upgraded yet, and that's because Java 17 requires you to upgrade all your dependencies, and there's just a lot of these hindrances that come in the way with upgrading. If you, over the past couple of days, looked around, you could see that a lot of people are even still stuck on Java 8 or even older, and that people are having issues upgrading all of these dependencies by hand. The person that you're looking to on the left or right might still even be using JUnit 4, and JUnit 5 came out 6 years ago. So let's see what we can do to migrate away from that quite easily. Now, the second cliche I want to get rid of is that I'm not going to spend 20-25 minutes building up to some demo that you by then can see coming from a mile away. Instead, we're going to give you the demo up front, because nothing ever goes wrong doing a live demo. So with that, I'm going to switch tabs, which is my first challenge. Come on. What's going on here? And for that, I'm going to take you to our documentation on OpenRewrite. If you only remember one thing from this presentation, let it be the docs.openrewrite.org web page, which tells you exactly what migrations we can apply for you, how to apply them, how to write your own, and if you have any questions, how to reach out for help via the links at the top. So for this talk, I'm going to do a demo, and for this demo, we're going to migrate a Spring Boot application from Spring Boot 2 on Java 8 all the way up to Spring Boot 3 on Java 17. And for that, we're going to look at the reference implementation of Spring Boot, which is the Spring Path Planner project, as you probably also already know by now. Now, if you go to this webpage, which you can just find if you browse our collection of available recipes, you'll see a short description, you will see who all contributed to this recipe, and you can also see that this recipe is composed of other smaller migration steps, which might look familiar if you've ever gone through the Spring Boot migration guides and then became discouraged and closed the tab back down again. Again, for Spring Boot 3, you have to first upgrade to Java 17. And if we look into the Java 17 migration, you can see that this one requires that you first upgrade to Java 11. When we apply all of these changes together for you at the same time, and while we do so, we also update you to new language features, such as the formatted methods, and we also introduce text blocks. So we can run all of this at the same time, and if you're using a Gradle project, then you have just some 8 lines of code to copy. But if you're using Maven, it's even easier. You just copy this one command, you run it on your project, and your project will be migrated to Spring Boot 3. That looks pretty good, but it's not exactly fast. I've given a demo before just on the command line, but it takes a while and it doesn't look very good. So what I'm instead going to do is I'm going to take you towards our platform, which is at the modern public.modern.io, where we're able to run these migration recipes quite quickly on a large scale as well. Now, this will look familiar. It's the exact same recipes that you can run with OpenRewrite, but we're going to make it a bit easier to run them here. So for that, I'm going to switch to the Spring Path Clinic project. And I'm just going to click Run. And as we do so, we can see that we're running these migration recipes against two different branches of the Spring Pad Clinic. The first one is the main branch of the Spring Pad Clinic project, which is just the project which has already been upgraded to Spring Boot 3. And I'll get to why we're still running the migration recipes there. The second one is an older Spring Boot 2 branch of the Spring Pad Clinic, which was still using Java 8, as it was, I think, 6 years ago by now. And you can see that in just under a minute, we've been able to migrate these branches both, and we can look at the results over here. Now, if you're not a Spring Boot user, there's probably still some changes in here that will be relevant for you as well. And if you use Quarkus, then some of the same recipes will be applied that you can see here. In this case, you can see that as part of our migrations, we're also applying some best practice recipes. So in this case, we've determined that, well, this AutoWrite annotation, zoom in a bit, yeah, sure. Better? So in this case, we've determined that we can remove this annotation from the controller, and it's been possible since Spring Boot 2. But we can still see this a lot on your projects at work. And if you're ever wondering, well, why did we make this exact change? Well, we tell you exactly why we made this change and how this is an improvement to your project. If we scroll further down, you can see that we also migrated some tests, which are still using JUnit 4, to JUnit 5. And not only that, but we're also swapping out the Mockito runner for the Mockito extension. And we're updating the lifecycle annotations. All of this will probably look familiar. Like we have to switch from JavaX to Jakarta. And all of this is just mind-numbing stuff that you would otherwise have to apply by hand. But you saw that we just ran this in under a minute. We also remove some of these annotation arguments, which are no longer needed, and all of these types of changes make that your application will feel like a more recent application, rather than something that's only had the version number changed. But we're not only updating your code, we're also updating your dependencies, and since I've zoomed in, I have to scroll a bit more. But when you get to that, you can see that we've updated the parent, but we've also determined that if you're going to run on Java 17, you probably want to update this one property, which influences your compiler plugin arguments. We had to update some plugins and even add in new dependencies. So we're not just upgrading, we're also looking at what used to be transitive and you were using them, and you have to now add in a dependency that you weren't using before. And all of these changes just make sure that your application will run on Spring Boot 3. And if you want to be sure that it runs, you can click here to validate the results. Or if you're fairly confident, you can just commit the results directly or start a pull request, whichever you want. If you want to ruin my next demo, this is a great way to do so. But like I said, we're not just updating the 2.0 branch. There's also some stuff in the 3.0 branch, which was migrated manually, which still is mixing some of the functionalities that we think are worthwhile improvements to pick up. So I highlighted before the the AutoWrite annotation. That's still in the current reference implementation of the Spring Pad Clinic. And there's more stuff, like we're introducing text blocks there where it makes sense, and this just goes to show that it's sensible to automate these migrations rather than do them manually. But since we now have a framework to make these automated changes, we figured, well, there's probably some more stuff that we can do for you, not directly tied to migrations. So with that, we're going to look at some of the recipes that you can run repeatedly on your projects. And for that, we have some best practice recipes. We have recipes for testing libraries or logging frameworks, and in Spring Boot or other frameworks, and all of these you can just run whenever you think is convenient. And these will clean up after you as you migrate your code, and just be sure that you are using all of these best practices. But one particularly useful set of recipes that you can run is this collection of static analysis issues. You probably in your organization have some scanning tool, which will tell you exactly where you're using some suboptimal patterns in your code, which will give you a nice report on exactly where you have work to do to resolve these issues. We think, well, we can do better. If you know some of these scanning tools, you can probably recognize some of these identifiers and the types of changes they want you to make. Well, we figured, well, we have a platform, we can just run all of these migration recipes quite quickly across, in this case, some 142 repositories. These are well-known Spring and via Netflix repositories, which will still contain a lot of these outdated patterns that you want to move away from. And you can see that these changes are starting to flow in quite quickly. And again, since I've zoomed, it's not as impressive, but be sure that all of this adds up to our estimate of like dozens of hours of time savings. We can look into individual changes and again explore why was this change made. Well, in this case, you can see that they're not yet using the diamond operator. And a lot of this just goes on and on of worthwhile changes you can still pick up. And we want you to be confident enough to just, on your organization, select all of this and just commit them at the same time and get this estimated 70 plus hours of time savings in just under a minute. So we have the same for vulnerabilities and a few more recipes that you can run, but I suggest you just explore the marketplace, whichever might be interesting for your projects. And I can do these types of migrations all day and not get bored, but I figured tell you a bit about how we're actually making these changes. And for that, we're going to get back to the regular program. So I'm going to quickly switch screens again. Does this work? Yeah. Come on. Yes. So, this is me, Tim. I used to do a lot of these migrations by hand. I was a consultant for 5 years, and I'd walk into organizations, find a lot of these outdated patterns, and then just hack away at lifting everything up to the latest versions. But it doesn't scale very well. It takes a long time, and I went looking for tools to help me in that space. And that's why when I discovered OpenRewrite about a year and a half ago, and I got quite excited about this technology. I started reporting issues, I started contributing smaller fixes, and even present about this on conferences. And that brings us here today. They eventually reached out, I think 4 times in a row, to ask when I was going to start. And after a nice sabbatical, I'm now here to tell you more about how you can do this yourself as well. Because perhaps you're facing some of the same challenges that I do. Like at a conference like this, you'll hear all about new language features coming up in Java 21. And then back at work, it's back to Java 8 and JUnit 4. And migrating all of that by hand can seem daunting and very rarely gets priority. So I want to show you just how easy it can be to apply these migrations such that you're able to pick up new language features and a lot of the fixes that are just in the newer versions. These are the types of changes that I'll be talking about. You already saw me apply some of these, and it's just a nice collection of fixes that you can apply quite easily. But if you try to do this by hand, you will hardly get anything else done. So automation may be the only way, especially for large organizations and maintaining thousands of services. Through OpenRewrite, you can migrate quite easily with just a single command. And in this talk, I'll tell you all about OpenRewrite, how it came about, how it works, and what you can do with it. And finally, we'll briefly look at who's developing these migration recipes and how to apply them to open source software. OpenRewrite was started at Netflix, initially to aid in the migration of an internal logging framework to AssertJ. You can probably imagine that any logging framework is going to be pervasive throughout an organization. To even consider migrating, you'd need perfectly accurate automation. So that's exactly what they did. They developed a parser to accurately read Java and turn source code into a lossless semantic tree. This model can then be modified to replace the old logging statements with calls to SLF4J. Next, the migrated model is written out as close as possible to the original source code, such that any changes made through OpenRewrite look just like a colleague worked on your code. Later, the same developers moved on to work on Spinnaker, and while trying to onboard teams and organizations there, they found that a lot of these teams were struggling with the same outdated frameworks, libraries, and language versions. So to help these teams adopt the latest versions, they developed a different set of transformations, which they applied through the same lossless semantic tree parser. And this allowed them to quickly reduce this technical debt, bringing teams from Spring Boot 1 to 2, and from JUnit 4 to JUnit 5. The project has since been open sourced, with the company behind it committed to making all recipes available under the Apache license for open source software. The initial focus for OpenRewrite was on Java virtual machine languages and surrounding technologies. There are parsers for Java, Groovy, Kotlin, YAML, and XML, which in turn unlock support for libraries and frameworks. Or in turn unlock support for build tools such as Maven and Gradle, and then libraries and frameworks. Ultimately, refactoring entire frameworks such as Micronaut, Quarkus, and Spring is supported. OpenRewrite is not the only parser capable of understanding and manipulating Java, but 3 features set us apart from the competition. The first is our focus on exact type attribution. By having the exact type available on any tree element, we can be sure to only manipulate exact matches. The second characteristic that sets us apart is the format preservation. We not only look at the functional code, but also the surrounding code style and indentation. That way, any changes will look minimal and will result in a minimal diff rather than a big formatter applied for a small change. And thirdly, our serialization format ensures that you're able to apply these changes quite quickly and at scale. And by manipulating the full lossless semantic tree, OpenRewrite can far exceed simple search and replace operations, which is not possible with just any tool. With the full lossless semantic tree built, we need to instruct OpenRewrite what operations to apply and where to apply them in your code. Recipes are how we define such a set of search and refactoring operations. Together, they accomplish a higher level task, such as a framework migration. You can think of these Lego building as Lego building blocks, ready to be applied with the proper parameters. There are hundreds of building blocks to, for instance, change types, change methods, change arguments, manipulate properties, and alter dependencies and plugins. Individual recipes are implemented as Java visitors that first match and then modify elements of the lossless semantic tree. There are plenty of examples available, but note that you only need a dedicated Java visitor when none of the existing recipes can already achieve your goals. Typically, you can get very far only configuring, combining, and applying existing recipes through a YAML description file. Modules then group together these fine-grained recipes into more coarse-grained, application-specific recipes. There are modules for logging frameworks, testing frameworks, and application frameworks such as Spring. And think of these as Lego sets with build plans for common migrations and fixes, ready to be used. In my opinion, the lossless semantic tree, combined with the large collection of open source recipes, is what sets us apart from other similar tools, such as Google Error-Prone's Refaster. I want to show you quickly how you can configure migration recipes in OpenRewrite, such that you can apply these to your own internal frameworks as well. Let's briefly look at a migration from JUnit 4 to JUnit 5, which I hope every one of you has done sometime in the past already. If you look at how we've defined this migration recipe, you can see that some of these changes will start to look familiar. At first, you know that you have to swap all the test annotations that you have, but you would also have to update the assertions and sometimes their argument order. You'd have to update all imports, you'd have to update any test rules, and that's just getting started. Some of these migration recipes make use of the building blocks that I mentioned, such as the change type recipes. Others are implemented as an imperative step, a dedicated Java visitor that manipulates the lossless semantic tree. And all these steps combine to achieve a complete JUnit 5 migration. And this is a common pattern with OpenRewrite. Large migrations are broken up into small reusable steps. Running migration recipes is fairly straightforward. First, you apply a build tool for OpenRewrite. And I've used Maven in this example, but Gradle works just as well. And then, depending on the changes you want to make, you add a dependency on the respective OpenRewrite module. And lastly, you run the OpenRewrite plugin with the migration recipe that you want to execute. And this recipe will, as I showed you before, transform your application from Spring Boot 1.5 or 2 or whatever you are at, all the way up to Spring Boot 3 and Java 17. It will alter the dependencies, plugins, and dependencies, and any Spring-specific test constructs as well. So now that we've seen how OpenRewrite works, let's have a brief look again at what you can do with it. Obviously, by now we've seen that it is well suited to migrations. You've mostly seen migrations from one version to another, but you can also migrate between frameworks. So if you want to switch from JUnit 5 assertions to AssertJ, we can apply a recipe for that. And the same thing if you want to migrate from Log4j to SLF4j. And some teams are even working on even larger migrations, such as to get you from Java EE to Spring, or from Spring to Quarkus, depending on who you talk to. Another application, as I showed you, are the common static analysis fixes. We support a large range of Checkstyle, sonar, and security findings to just reduce this technical debt in mere minutes. And finally, we have a whole class of recipes to enforce a certain code style. And rather than merely apply a formatter, we go a step further to actually change your code, such that it reads consistently from project to project. And in addition to what's already available, it's very easy to define new recipes specific to your applications. So now that we've seen how it works and what it can do, let's briefly look ahead at what is still to come. You've seen that we have multiple parsers for different languages already, but as you can imagine, we also have some catching up to do still. We're expanding our parsers for Java and Kotlin to support an even broader range of syntax, leading up to the newer versions of Java 21 coming up. The interesting thing about Kotlin is that our Java migration recipes also just work for Kotlin, even though the languages look a bit different. And we're testing this right now with the developers behind the popular Arrow framework for Kotlin to bring their users from the current version up to the next version. We're also looking to make it even easier to define migration recipes so that we can support a broader range of migration recipes. And for that, we're looking at how Refactor defines their migration recipes. We're looking together with the team at Picnic, who have developed the error-prone support set of recipes, to bring all of those recipes into OpenRewrite, such that you can take advantage of the work that they've done. We're also looking at building a CLI to make it even easier to run recipes, and to integrate with, for instance, GitHub Actions to give you feedback on pull requests. And finally, we're currently expanding the range of languages that we support. So we already have a Python implementation, and we're also expanding that into TypeScript and JavaScript right now. Now, some of these features are still in active development, and I can't give you an exact timeline when you can use some of this, but it's quite interesting to follow along, as you can do on our public GitHub. Now, as a last subject, I want to tell you a bit about the company behind OpenRewrite. As I said before, Modern has committed to making all recipes available under the Apache license for open source software. Our focus is on applying recipes at scale, as you've seen me do through the web interface. Through Modern, clients can discover code patterns across an entire organization and target these for transformation. But even if you're not a paying customer, you can still use our web interface to browse the available recipes and apply them to some 30,000 open source projects. And this can be a great way to start contributing back to open source software. And if you find that any migration steps are missing, OpenRewrite itself is very accepting of new contributions. The community plays a large role in the development of these recipes. Now, as you could maybe tell from my email address, which is just tim@moderne.io, we're not a really big company. We're with 20 people right now, but we're pretty well connected into the broader Java community. Through collaborations, other companies contribute migration recipes for their libraries and frameworks. As we saw just last week with the release of Quarkus 3, they have a migration tool built fully upon OpenRewrite. And the same goes for the team behind Spring and the team behind Micronaut as well. Having these collaborations ensure that their users are able to upgrade easily and timely with new releases, rather than only starting to build recipes after the framework comes out. And if you maintain or merely enjoy a particular library or framework, you can help all other users by providing these migration recipes. And so with that, we're getting near the end of my presentation. Before I send you on your way and off to lunch, I want to recommend a few resources where you can learn more. The first one is the link that I told you at the start, docs.openrewrite.org, which will tell you everything that all the recipes we can run, how to apply them, how to develop your own, and how to get help in case you need it. The second is on GitHub. You can follow everything that we do, and it's all out in public, which is, I think, a really fun way to develop. So if you have an issue, you'll probably see me reach out quite quickly, and typically we hope to resolve any problems quite soon, or ask you to contribute if you're up for that as well. If you want to try some recipes quickly, you can have a look at public.moderne.io, which you just saw me do. And this is a thing that I'm also doing on the weekends. So for instance, the Apache Maven project, they have some 100 repositories and they have some patents that they want to get rid of. And with this tooling, it's just become trivial to apply that in bulk. And finally, if you have any questions, you can reach out on our public Slack channel or via email. And if you want to read a blog post which covers a bit of the same material, and I wrote one over a year ago. So while the version numbers are a bit dated, it's a good way to see how you can apply this to an existing project. For your own projects, I recommend you start with the testing framework migrations, which are an easy way to gain confidence in the tool and see what it can mean for your project. And with that, I want to thank you all for your attention.